Private Brian Russell's heart raced as Vega, the Tsenkethi female, pressed her lithe form against him in the shadowy corner of the military base on Tsenketh. Her alien eyes, filled with desperation, locked onto his as she whispered, "Please, human, I need your assistance. My body burns with unfulfilled desire." The air between them crackled with tension. Brian's mind reeled, processing the surreal situation. Here he was, a human soldier on a distant world, suddenly thrust into an interspecies incident that could shatter the fragile peace between their races. Vega's skin shimmered with an otherworldly glow, a physical manifestation of her species' rare and intense mating cycle. She trembled, her voice strained as she explained, "Our heat, it consumes us. Without release, the pain becomes unbearable." Brian's training hadn't prepared him for this. He hesitated, weighing his duty against the raw need in Vega's eyes. The consequences of his next move could ripple across galaxies. Before he could respond, a roar of fury shattered the moment. Kraz, Vega's husband and a prominent Tsenkethi official, burst into view. His face contorted with rage, mandibles flaring as he bellowed, "What is the meaning of this?" The commotion drew attention from both human and Tsenkethi personnel nearby. Whispers and pointed fingers spread like wildfire through the base. Brian felt the weight of countless eyes upon him as the situation spiraled out of control. Kraz advanced, his imposing form bristling with anger. "You dare to defile my wife? To mock our customs?" he snarled at Brian. Turning to the gathering crowd, he shouted, "Is this how the humans honor our alliance? With betrayal and lust?" Military police pushed through the throng, human and Tsenkethi officers alike struggling to contain the chaos. Brian's commanding officer, Major Sarah Chen, emerged from the crowd. Her face was a mask of controlled fury as she barked, "Russell, my office, now!" As Brian was led away, he caught a glimpse of Vega being escorted by Tsenkethi medical staff. She looked back at him, her eyes a mix of longing and fear. The base had become a powder keg of tension, with species eyeing each other warily. In the command center, alarms blared as reports flooded in. Human medical teams scrambled to research Tsenkethi biology, seeking to understand the heat cycle that had triggered this crisis. Meanwhile, military strategists huddled around holographic displays, assessing potential diplomatic fallout. Major Chen's voice cut through the din as Brian entered her office. "Do you have any idea what you've done, Russell? Kraz is demanding your immediate removal from Tsenketh. He's threatening to terminate our entire cooperation agreement." Brian's mind raced. He knew his actions could jeopardize years of careful diplomacy, yet he couldn't shake the image of Vega's pleading eyes. As he opened his mouth to explain, a priority communication flashed on the major's screen. Kraz's face appeared, his features set in grim determination. "Humans," he intoned, "you have one planetary rotation to remove the offender from our world and offer suitable reparations. Fail, and our alliance ends." The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy with implications. As Brian stood at attention, he realized that his encounter with Vega had ignited a firestorm that threatened to consume not just his career, but the future of human-Tsenkethi relations. The clock was ticking, and the fate of two species now rested on the resolution of an alien girl's heat and a human soldier's choice. Major Chen's office fell silent as Kraz's ultimatum faded from the screen. Brian stood rigid, his mind racing through the implications of what had just transpired. Before he could formulate a response, Chen's comm unit buzzed urgently. "Major, your presence is required immediately in Conference Room Alpha. General Marcus and Ambassador Zorn are assembling an emergency meeting," a crisp voice announced. Chen's eyes narrowed as she assessed Brian. "You're coming with me, Russell. Every detail of this incident needs to be on the table." As they strode through the corridors, Brian felt the weight of countless stares. Whispers followed in their wake, a mix of human and Tsenkethi voices speculating on the unfolding drama. The base had become a pressure cooker of tension, with species lines clearly drawn. Conference room. Alpha buzzed with activity as they entered. General Marcus, a stern-faced man with graying temples, stood at the head of the table beside Ambassador Zorn, whose iridescent scales shimmered under the harsh lighting. The room was filled with a mix of human and Zenkethi officials, their faces etched with concern. "Private Russell," General Marcus's voice cut through the murmur. "Explain yourself." Brian swallowed hard and recounted the events in the shadowy corner of the base. He emphasized his lack of physical engagement with Vega, describing her distress and his own confusion at the situation. As he spoke, the door burst open. Kraz stormed in, his massive frame quivering with awe-inspiring rage. "I demand this human's immediate expulsion from Tsenketh," he roared, mandibles flaring. Ambassador Zorn raised a hand, his voice calm but firm. "Kraz, control yourself. There are greater issues at play here than your personal grievances." The room fell silent as Zorn continued. "The truth is, Kraz's aggressive reaction stems from his own inadequacies. He and Vega are genetically incompatible, leaving him unable to satisfy her during her heat cycles." A collective gasp rippled through the assembly. Kraz's face contorted with humiliation and fury. "You dare!" he began, but Zorn cut him off. "This incident has merely brought to light a problem that affects many in our society," Zorn stated, his gaze sweeping the room. "We can no longer ignore the biological realities that threaten the stability of our people." As the implications of this revelation sank in, a commotion outside the conference room drew everyone's attention. Dr. Elena Hicks, the lead human xenobiologist, burst in, her lab coat askew and her eyes wide with urgency. "Vega's condition is deteriorating rapidly," she announced, her voice tight with concern. "The unfulfilled heat cycle is causing severe hormonal imbalances. If left untreated, she could suffer long-term health consequences." The room erupted into chaos as officials argued over the best course of action. Dr. Hicks raised her voice above the din. "I have a potential solution, but it's unconventional." All eyes turned to her as she continued. "We could allow Private Russell to assist Vega through her heat cycle under controlled medical supervision." The suggestion hit the room like a bomb. Shouts of outrage mingled with murmurs of intrigue. General Marcus leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "Doctor, are you certain this is medically necessary?" Dr. Hicks nodded emphatically. "It's not just about immediate relief. This could prevent serious long-term health issues for Vega and potentially offer insights that could help other affected Zenkethi." Kraz, his face a mask of disgust, spat, "Never! I won't allow this human to defile my wife." He stormed out of the room, the door slamming behind him. Ambassador Zorn sighed heavily. "I fear Kraz's reaction is only the beginning. This proposal, while potentially beneficial, could spark significant cultural backlash among our people." General Marcus stood, his decision made. "We need to consider all options for the sake of both our alliance and Vega's health. Dr. Hicks, proceed with preparations, but ensure all proper protocols are followed. This will only happen with full consent from all parties involved." As the meeting adjourned, Brian found himself cornered by Dr. Hicks. "Private Russell, I know this is an extraordinary situation, but your participation could be crucial. Are you willing to assist if Vega consents?" Brian's mind reeled. He thought of Vega's pleading eyes, the desperation in her voice. A mix of duty and something deeper, something he wasn't ready to name, compelled him to nod. "Yes, if it's what Vega wants and it can help her, I'll do it." Outside the conference room, the base was a hive of activity. Security personnel rushed to reinforce key areas as reports came in of growing unrest. Kraz's voice could be heard over loudspeakers in the Tsenkethi sector, rallying his supporters against the human corruption. In the medical bay, Vega lay on a bed, her skin pale and her breathing labored. When Dr. Hicks approached her with the proposal, Vega's eyes widened with a mix of hope and fear. I don't know," she whispered, her voice weak. "The consequences. My standing, my marriage." Dr. Hicks took Vega's hand gently. "I understand your concerns, but your health is at risk. This could be your best chance for relief and long-term well-being." As Vega pondered her decision, alarms blared throughout the base. Security feeds showed a group of Tsenkethi extremists, inspired by Kraz's inflammatory rhetoric, advancing on the medical bay. General Marcus's voice crackled over the comm system. All personnel, be advised. We have a code red situation. Secure all sensitive areas and prepare for potential hostilities. In the medical bay, Brian arrived, escorted by a security detail. He locked eyes with Vega, seeing the pain and uncertainty in her gaze. As the sounds of conflict echoed from the corridors outside, they found themselves at the center of a storm that threatened to reshape the future of human-Synkethi relations. The base held its breath, teetering on the edge of chaos, as two individuals faced a decision that could alter the course of interstellar diplomacy forever. The alarms blaring throughout the base jolted Brian into action. He looked at Vega, her skin now pale and clammy, her breathing shallow. Dr. Hicks burst into the medical bay, her lab coat fluttering behind her. "We need to move now," she said, her voice tense but controlled. "Security reports multiple breaches. It's not safe here." Brian nodded, his military training kicking in. "What's the plan, Doctor?" "We've prepared a secure location for the procedure," Dr. Hicks explained as she began disconnecting Vega from the monitoring equipment. "But we'll need to get there first." Two Synkethi nurses entered, pushing a mobile medical unit. Together, they carefully transferred Vega onto the gurney. Brian took point, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. As they exited the medical bay, the corridor lights flickered ominously. The distant sound of shouting and what might have been weapons fire echoed through the halls. Brian led the group, his senses on high alert, every shadow a potential threat. They had barely turned the first corner when an explosion rocked the base. The lights went out, plunging them into darkness. Emergency lighting sputtered to life, bathing the corridor in an eerie red glow. "Keep moving," Brian urged, his voice low and steady. "Stay close to the walls." They pressed on through the chaos. Twice they had to duck into side rooms to avoid groups of panicked personnel running past. Brian's heart raced, but he forced himself to remain calm, for Vega's sake. As they approached a junction, Brian held up a hand, signaling the group to stop. He peered around the corner and quickly pulled back. Three armed Synkethi, their scales glinting in the emergency lighting, were advancing down the corridor. "Extremists," he whispered to Dr. Hicks. "We need another route." Dr. Hicks pointed to a maintenance access panel. "Through there. It'll be tight, but it should lead us to the secure area." Brian pried open the panel, wincing at every creak and groan of the metal. He helped the nurses maneuver the gurney into the narrow passage, then ushered Dr. Hicks inside before sealing the panel behind them. The maintenance tunnel was claustrophobic, barely wide enough for the gurney. They inched forward in the dim light of Dr. Hicks's medical scanner. Vega moaned softly, her condition visibly worsening. "How much further?" Brian asked, his voice tight with concern. "Not far," Dr. Hicks replied, her eyes fixed on her scanner. "There should be an exit panel just ahead." As they approached the exit, a violent tremor shook the base. Dust and debris rained down on them. Brian braced himself against the wall, shielding Vega from the falling particles. "What was that?" one of the nurses asked, fear evident in his voice. "Felt like an explosion," Brian replied grimly. "We need to hurry." They emerged from the maintenance tunnel into what appeared to be a storage area. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with medical supplies and equipment. Dr. Hicks moved quickly, activating a hidden panel that revealed a reinforced door. "In here," she said, ushering them inside. The room beyond was small but well-equipped. A medical bed dominated the center, surrounded by state-of-the-art equipment. Brian helped transfer Vega onto the bed as Dr. Hicks began setting up for the procedure. "How long will this take?" Brian asked, acutely aware of the sounds of conflict echoing through the base. Dr. Hicks shook her head. "It's hard to say. Synkethi biology is complex, and this is unprecedented. An hour, maybe two." Brian nodded, his eyes hardened. "I'll secure the perimeter. Do what you need to do." As Dr. Hicks and the nurses began the delicate process of stabilizing Vega, Brian took up position near the door. He found a makeshift weapon, a length of pipe that had broken free during the tremors, and stood ready. The minutes ticked by, agonizingly slow. Occasional explosions rocked the base, each one causing Brian to tighten his grip on the pipe. He could hear Dr. Hicks murmuring instructions to the nurses, the beep of medical equipment, and Vega's labored breathing. Suddenly, a loud bang on the door made everyone freeze. Brian raised the pipe, his muscles tense. Another bang, followed by the sound of metal scraping against metal. "Someone's trying to break in," Brian warned, his voice low. Dr. Hicks looked up from Vega, her face pale. "We can't stop now. She's at a critical point." Brian nodded grimly. "Keep going. I'll hold them off." The door burst open with a thunderous crash. Brian found himself face to face with Kraz, the Tsenkethi's eyes wild with rage and something else. Fear, perhaps, or desperation. "Step aside, human," Kraz snarled, advancing into the room. Brian stood his ground, pipe raised. "It's over, Kraz. Look at what you've done. The base is in chaos. People are hurt. And for what?" Kraz's eyes darted to Vega on the bed, then back to Brian. "You don't understand. This abomination cannot be allowed." "It's not about us," Brian said, taking a cautious step forward. "It's about Vega, your wife. She's suffering, Kraz. We can help her." For a moment, Kraz seemed to waver. His mandibles twitched, his hands clenching and unclenching. But then his face hardened once more. "No," he growled. "I won't let you taint her." He lunged at Brian, his greater size and strength nearly overwhelming the human. They grappled, crashing into shelves and equipment. Brian fought desperately, knowing that if he fell, Vega and the others would be defenseless. As they struggled, alarms began blaring throughout the base. A computerized voice echoed through the halls. "Warning, reactor overload imminent. All personnel evacuate immediately." Brian's momentary distraction cost him. Kraz's fist connected with his jaw, sending him stumbling backward. As he fought to regain his balance, he saw Kraz advancing on the medical bed where Vega lay. Time seemed to slow. Brian saw the look of terror on Dr. Hicks's face, the tenacity in Kraz's eyes, and the vulnerable form of Vega on the bed. In that moment, he knew that his next action would determine not just their fate, but potentially the future of human-Tsenkethi relations. With a burst of speed he didn't know he possessed, Brian launched himself at Kraz. The impact sent them both crashing to the floor, away from Vega and the medical team. As they rolled across the room, trading blows, Brian caught glimpses of Dr. Hicks working frantically over Vega. The alarms continued to blare, a constant reminder of the larger danger they all faced. Somewhere in the base, General Marcus and his team were racing to prevent a catastrophe. But here, in this small room, Brian fought his own battle, one that could have equally far-reaching consequences. As Kraz pinned him to the floor, his weight crushing the air from Brian's lungs, a new sound cut through the chaos, a sound that made them both freeze. Vega's voice, weak but clear, called out, "Kraz, please, stop. Kraz, please!" Vega's voice, weak but clear, cut through the chaos. Both men froze, their struggle momentarily forgotten. Kraz's eyes widened, a mixture of emotions flashing across his face. Brian used the distraction to push the Tsenkethi off him, scrambling to his feet. Dr. Hicks stepped back from the medical bed, her face shining with sweat but her eyes triumphant. "It's done," she announced. "Vega's condition is stabilizing." Kraz stumbled towards his wife, his earlier rage seemingly evaporating. He reached out, his hand hovering uncertainly over Vega's arm. How do you feel?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Vega's eyes fluttered open, focusing on her husband. "The pain, it's subsiding," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I feel relief." The moment of peace was shattered as another explosion rocked the base. The computerized voice blared again, more urgent than before. "Warning, reactor meltdown imminent. Evacuate immediately." Brian's mind raced. He looked at Dr. Hicks, then at Vega and Kraz. "Doctor, can you handle things here?" Dr. Hicks nodded firmly. "Go. We'll be fine." With a final glance at Vega, Brian sprinted out of the room. The corridor outside was in chaos, smoke filling the air and debris littering the floor. He spotted a weapons locker at the end of the hall and made a beeline for it, dodging panicked personnel along the way. Inside the locker, Brian found a plasma rifle. The weapon felt heavy in his hands, a grim reminder of the situation's severity. He checked the charge and headed out, his destination clear, the reactor control room. As he navigated the maze-like corridors of the base, Brian encountered pockets of resistance. Tzenkethi extremists, their scales glinting in the emergency lighting, fired wildly at anything that moved. Brian's combat training kicked in. He ducked, rolled, and returned fire with precision, his human reflexes giving him an edge in the confined spaces. Rounding a corner, Brian came face to face with a group of extremists led by a familiar face, Draz, Kraz's former second-in-command. The Tzenkethi's eyes narrowed as he recognized Brian. "The human corruption ends here," Draz snarled, raising his weapon. Brian didn't hesitate. He dove behind a fallen support beam as plasma bolts sizzled past. The air filled with the acrid smell of ozone and burning metal. Brian popped up, squeezing off several shots. 2 extremists fell, but Draz and the others pressed forward. As Brian fought for his life, his mind drifted briefly to Vega and the others in the medical bay. He hoped they were safe, that Kraz had seen reason. Another near miss snapped his attention back to the present. "General Marcus," Brian shouted into his comm unit between bursts of fire. "This is Private Russell. I'm pinned down in Section C. What's your status?" The general's voice crackled through, strained but determined. "Russell, we're nearing the reactor. Control room, but we've got a problem. The extremists have rigged it with explosives. We need your expertise." Brian's heart sank. The situation was worse than he'd feared. "Understood, sir. I'm on my way." With renewed perseverance, Brian unleashed a barrage of plasma fire, forcing Draz and his followers to take cover. Using the momentary reprieve, he sprinted down a side passage, the sounds of pursuit fading behind him. As he ran, Brian passed scenes of destruction and heroism. Human and Tzenkethi security forces fought side by side against the extremists. Medical teams tended to the wounded, regardless of species. Despite the chaos, there were glimpses of the alliance they had worked so hard to build. Brian finally reached the reactor control room, his lungs burning from the exertion. General Marcus and a handful of soldiers were crouched behind makeshift barricades, exchanging fire with a group of entrenched extremists. "Glad you could join us, Russell," Marcus grunted, ducking as a plasma bolt sizzled overhead. "We've got multiple explosive devices wired into the reactor's cooling system. Think you can disarm them?" Brian assessed the situation quickly. The reactor core pulsed ominously, its emergency containment fields flickering. Wires snaked from several points around the room, leading to crude but effective explosive devices. "I'll need cover," Brian said, his eyes scanning the room for the best approach. Marcus nodded grimly. "You'll have it. Just make it quick. We're running out of time." As the general and his team laid down suppressing fire, Brian darted from cover to cover, making his way to the first explosive. His hands moved swiftly, cutting wires and disabling triggers. Sweat beaded on his forehead, each second feeling like an eternity. One by one, the devices were neutralized, but as Brian reached the final explosive, a familiar voice rang out. "Step away from that device, human," Draz growled, his weapon trained on Brian's head. Brian froze, his hands hovering over the wires. He could see General Marcus and the others pinned down, unable to help. The reactor's warning klaxons grew louder, a countdown to disaster. In that moment, as he stared down the barrel of Draz's weapon, Brian realized that the fate of not just the base, but perhaps the entire human Tzenkethi alliance, rested in his hands. The next few seconds would determine everything. Everything. With a deep breath, Brian made his decision. "It's over, Draz," he said, slowly turning to face the Tzenkethi. "Look around you. The base is falling apart. We're all in danger. Is this really what you want?" Draz's eyes darted between Brian and the reactor, his weapon wavering. For a moment, Brian thought he saw a flicker of doubt in the Tzenkethi's expression. Suddenly, a new voice cut through the tension. "Stand down, Draz." It was Kraz, standing in the doorway with Vega leaning against him for support. Draz's mandibles twitched in surprise. "Commander, but why?" "Because this madness has to end," Kraz said, his voice firm. "I was wrong, Draz. We were all wrong. Look at what we've done." As Draz hesitated, Brian seized the opportunity. With lightning speed, he disarmed the final explosive and rolled away from the reactor core. General Marcus and his team sprang into action, subduing Draz and the remaining extremists. In the chaotic aftermath, as emergency teams worked to stabilize the reactor and tend to the wounded, Brian found himself in a hastily repaired conference room. The signs of recent conflict were still visible: scorch marks on the walls, makeshift repairs to damaged equipment. Around a large table sat an unlikely group: General Marcus, Ambassador Zorn, and newly arrived representatives from both Earth and the Tsenkethi homeworld. Brian felt acutely aware of Vega's presence beside him, her scales still bearing faint traces of her recent ordeal. Kraz stood nearby, his posture a mix of wariness and grit. Ambassador Zorn cleared his throat, his antennae twitching nervously. In light of recent events, it's clear that we must take drastic action to prevent future incidents. A Tsenkethi representative, her scales shimmering with an iridescent sheen, leaned forward. "We have been impressed by the actions of Private Russell," she said, nodding towards Brian. "His bravery in saving the base and assisting Vega demonstrates the potential for cooperation between our species." General Marcus nodded grimly. "It's a start, but we need more than individual acts of heroism. We need systemic change." The room fell silent as the Earth representative, a stern-faced woman in a crisp uniform, spoke. "We have a proposal. It's radical, possibly even controversial, but we believe it could be the key to lasting peace between our species." Brian felt a sense of unease growing in his stomach as the woman continued. "We're calling it the Interspecies Family Initiative, or IFI for short," she explained. "It would allow willing human and Tsenkethi individuals to form official partnerships, including the possibility of raising children together." A murmur of shock rippled through the room. Brian felt Vega stiffen beside him, her hand unconsciously seeking his. Ambassador Zorn's antennae quivered with excitement. This could be exactly what we need: a powerful symbol of unity and a practical solution to the biological issues faced by some Tsenkethi, like Vega. General Marcus frowned, his brow furrowed in thought. "It's a bold move, I'll give you that. But we'd need stringent safety measures, a thorough vetting process for participants, ongoing monitoring." As the discussion continued, Brian's mind whirled. He glanced at Vega, seeing his own mixture of shock and uncertainty mirrored in her eyes. The Tsenkethi representative who had spoken earlier fixed her gaze on Brian and Vega. "We believe you two would be ideal candidates to be the first participants in the IFI program. Your experiences together, both the challenges and the triumphs, make you uniquely suited to serve as a test case for human Tsenkethi partnerships." Brian felt as if the air had been sucked from his lungs. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Vega squeezed his hand, her voice soft but steady as she addressed the room. "This is unexpected. We would need time to consider such a significant commitment." Kraz stepped forward, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "If I may," he said, "I would like to offer my support for this initiative. My actions in the past were misguided, but I see now the potential for true understanding between our species. I would be honored to act as a cultural liaison for the program, to help bridge the gap between human and Tsenkethi perspectives." The room buzzed with surprised murmurs at Kraz's change of heart. Brian saw the Earth representatives exchange meaningful glances, clearly reassessing their positions. As the meeting continued, the enormity of what was being proposed began to sink in. Brian's mind raced with questions and concerns. How would this affect his career, his relationship with Vega? And what about the possibility of children, something he had never seriously considered before, let alone with someone from another species? The discussion turned to the practical aspects of implementing the IFI program. Dr. Elena Hicks, still looking exhausted from her earlier efforts to save Vega, was called in to consult on the medical implications. "We'll need to develop comprehensive protocols," she explained, her voice hoarse but determined. "Regular health screenings, genetic compatibility tests, and extensive research into the potential for hybrid offspring." As Dr. Hicks outlined her preliminary plans, Brian noticed Vega listening intently, her expression a mix of fascination and apprehension. The meeting stretched on for hours, with debates ranging from housing arrangements for interspecies couples to the legal implications of human Zenkethi marriages. Through it all, Brian felt as if he were watching events unfold from outside his own body, the weight of expectation growing heavier with each passing moment. As the conference room emptied, Brian and Vega found themselves alone, the weight of unspoken thoughts hanging between them. "Brian," Vega said softly, her scales shimmering in the dim light, "what are we going to do?" Before Brian could respond, a commotion in the corridor drew their attention. Through the open door, they could see groups of base personnel gathered around comm screens, their faces a mix of shock, curiosity, and in some cases, anger. "The news has leaked," Brian realized aloud, his heart sinking as he watched the first signs of protest forming among the crowd. Vega's grip on his hand tightened. "It seems our decision may have far-reaching consequences beyond just us," she said, her voice tinged with worry. As they stood there, caught between the expectations of their superiors and the uncertain reactions of their peers, Brian knew that whatever they decided would shape not just their future, but potentially the future of human Zenkethi relations for generations to come. The base around them hummed with a new energy, part excitement, part fear, all change. In the coming days, weeks, and months, this refitted mining outpost would become the crucible for a grand experiment in interspecies cooperation. And at the center of it all stood Brian and Vega, their personal journey now inextricably linked to the fate of two civilizations. As they stepped out into the corridor, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, Brian couldn't help but wonder, what would their next step be in this brave new world they found themselves creating? The following weeks saw the base transform into a hive of activity. As news of the Interspecies Family Initiative spread, the once quiet corridors buzzed with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Brian and Vega found themselves at the center of it all, their every move scrutinized by curious onlookers and zealous scientists alike. Dr. Elena Hicks, her eyes ringed with dark circles from countless sleepless nights, strode into the newly established genetics lab. "We're ready to begin," she announced, her voice a mix of exhaustion and terrifying excitement. Brian and Vega exchanged a glance, their hands intertwined. The weight of what they were about to undertake hung heavy in the air. "Are you sure about this?" Brian asked softly, his thumb tracing circles on Vega's scaled hand. Vega's multifaceted eyes met his, a complexity of emotions swirling within them. "We've come this far," she replied, her voice steady despite the slight tremble in her mandibles. "We can't turn back now." The next few months were a whirlwind of tests, treatments, and procedures. Dr. Hicks and her team worked tirelessly, pushing the boundaries of genetic science. Brian watched as Vega endured injection after injection, her body slowly being prepared for something unprecedented. One morning, as Brian entered the lab for yet another round of tests, he overheard Dr. Hicks speaking urgently into her comm unit. "Yes, Ambassador, I understand the implications, but I assure you, we're on the verge of a breakthrough. The preliminary results are extraordinary." As if on cue, a junior scientist burst into the room, datapad clutched tightly in his hands. "Dr. Hicks, we've done it! The embryos are viable!" The lab erupted into cheers and congratulations. Brian felt a surge of emotions, joy, fear, disbelief, as Dr. Hicks turned to him, her face beaming. "Brian, we need to talk to Vega. It's time to move forward with the implantation." The news of their success spread like wildfire across the base and beyond. Within days, the quiet mining outpost had become the center of a galactic storm. Journalists from a dozen worlds clamored for interviews, while protesters on both sides of the issue gathered outside the base's perimeter. General Marcus called an emergency meeting to address the situation. "We're implementing increased security measures immediately," he announced, his face grim. "We've already intercepted several threats against Brian and Vega." Kraz, now fully embracing his role as cultural liaison, spoke up. "We need to do more than just protect them. We need to change minds. I propose a series of cultural exchange events to help both humans and Zenkethi understand each other better." As the base grappled with its new reality, Brian and Vega found themselves thrust into the spotlight. Cameras followed their every move, capturing intimate moments for an audience of billions. "How does it feel to be carrying the future of two species?" a reporter shouted as they made their way to a medical appointment. Vega, her normally vibrant scales dulled by fatigue, simply pressed closer to Brian. He wrapped an arm around her protectively, glaring at the assembled media. Inside the newly constructed medical wing, Dr. Hicks greeted them with a tired smile. "How are you feeling today, Vega?" "Tired," Vega admitted, "and different. My body is changing in ways I don't understand." Dr. Hicks nodded sympathetically. "That's to be expected. We're in uncharted territory here, but I promise you, we're monitoring everything closely." As the weeks passed, the base swelled with new arrivals. Humans and Tzenkethi alike flocked to the outpost, drawn by the promise of the IFI program. The influx strained resources, forcing General Marcus to implement rapid expansion plans. Amidst the chaos, Brian found himself torn between his duties and his desire to stay by Vega's side. When a new threat emerged, an anti-hybridization group planning an attack, he was called upon to assist in base defense. "I can't leave you," Brian protested, even as he knew his skills were needed. Vega placed a hand on his cheek, her touch cool against his skin. "You must. Our child will need a safe world to be born into. Go, help make that happen." Reluctantly, Brian joined the security teams, working long hours to fortify the base. He caught glimpses of Vega only in passing, each time noting how her body changed, adapting to carry their unprecedented offspring. As the due date approached, tensions on the base reached a fever pitch. Security checkpoints sprang up overnight, and military personnel patrolled the corridors with weapons at the ready. In the heart of the medical wing, Vega lay on a specialized biobed, surrounded by a team of human and Tzenkethi doctors. Brian stood by her side, his hand gripping hers tightly. Dr. Hicks entered, her face a mask of professional calm. "It's time," she announced. "Are you ready to make history?" Brian and Vega exchanged a look, years of shared experiences passing between them in an instant. Whatever came next, they would face it together. As the medical team prepared for the unprecedented birth, alarms suddenly blared throughout the base. General Marcus's voice crackled over the comm system. "All personnel, battle stations, we have multiple incoming bogies. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." Brian's heart raced as he looked from Vega to the door and back again. The moment they had prepared for and feared had finally arrived. The fate of their child, and perhaps the future of human Tzenkethi relations, hung in the balance as the base braced for attack. Attack. The alarms blared through the medical wing as Brian's heart raced. He looked from Vega to the door, torn between his duty and his desire to stay by her side. "Go," Vega said, her voice strained but determined. "They need you out there." Brian squeezed her hand, meeting her multifaceted eyes. "I'll be back as soon as I can. Dr. Hicks, keep her safe." The doctor nodded, already mobilizing her team. "We've prepared for this, Brian. Focus on defending the base." With a final glance at Vega, Brian sprinted from the room. The corridors were a flurry of activity as personnel rushed to their stations. He made his way to the command center, where General Marcus was barking orders. "Powell, glad you're here," Marcus said as Brian entered. "Take charge of the outer perimeter defenses. We've got both human and Tzenkethi units out there. Make sure they work together." Brian nodded, pushing aside his personal concerns to focus on the task at hand. He quickly assessed the situation, coordinating with unit leaders to create a multi-layered defense around the base. "Human snipers, I want you providing cover for the Tzenkethi close combat specialists," he ordered through his comm unit. "Tzenkethi shield generators, focus on protecting our artillery positions." As the battle unfolded, Brian's unique experience with both species proved invaluable. He anticipated the attackers' moves, countering them with a blend of human and Tzenkethi tactics that kept the enemy off balance. Inside the medical facility, Dr. Hicks and her team worked feverishly to prepare for Vega's delivery. The specialized birthing chamber hummed with energy, its adaptive systems ready to accommodate the unprecedented hybrid birth. "Vega, your contractions are intensifying," Dr. Hicks said, monitoring a complex array of readouts. We're going to start the hormone treatment now to stabilize the fetus's genetic structure. Vega nodded, her scales shimmering with a sheen of sweat. Kraz stood nearby, having volunteered for her security detail. I swear on my life, the Tsenkethi said, his mandibles clicking with emotion. No harm will come to you or the child. Outside, the battle raged. The Purity Front launched wave after wave of attacks, testing the base's defenses. Brian's strategy held, but he could see the strain on both human and Tsenkethi forces. We can't keep this up forever, he muttered, studying the tactical display. A junior officer rushed in, breathless. Sir, we've detected a security breach in Sector 7. They've used stolen access codes to bypass the outer perimeter. Brian's blood ran cold. Sector 7 was just 2 levels below the medical facility. He grabbed his weapon, barking orders as he moved. Redirect Units 3 and 5 to seal off all access to the upper levels. I'm heading there myself. As he fought his way through the corridors, Brian could hear the sounds of combat growing closer to the heart of the base. He arrived at a defensive choke point just as a group of Purity Front extremists broke through. The firefight was intense, with both sides using a mix of human and Tsenkethi weapons. Brian ducked and weaved, his muscles burning, as he pushed himself to the limit. He took down 3 attackers in quick succession, his shots precise and lethal. In the birthing chamber, Vega's labor had reached a critical stage. Dr. Hicks frowned at her instruments, noting unexpected fluctuations in Vega's vital signs. The hybrid physiology is causing complications, she announced, her voice tense. We need to adjust the hormone levels and increase genetic stabilization. As the medical team scrambled to adapt their procedures, the sounds of fighting grew closer. Kraz tensed, moving to stand between the door and Vega's bed. Suddenly, the door exploded inward. Through the smoke strode Victor Rand, leader of the Purity Front, his eyes blazing with fanatical hatred. This abomination will not be allowed to live, he snarled, raising his weapon. Kraz launched himself at Rand, his powerful Tsenkethi frame colliding with the human extremist. They crashed to the floor, grappling fiercely as the medical team worked frantically to stabilize Vega and her unborn child. Brian, hearing the commotion, redoubled his efforts to reach the medical facility. He fought like a man possessed, his every move driven by the need to protect Vega and their child. As he finally reached the birthing chamber, he saw Kraz locked in combat with Rand. Without hesitation, Brian joined the fray. His fist connected with Rand's jaw, sending the man staggering back. "It's over, Rand," Brian growled, standing protectively in front of Vega's bed. Rand's eyes darted around the room, realizing he was outnumbered and outmatched. With a snarl of defiance, he reached for a concealed weapon. Brian moved faster. In one fluid motion, he disarmed Rand and pinned him to the ground, securing his hands behind his back. "Dr. Hicks," Brian called out, his voice hoarse from exertion, "how's Vega?" The doctor looked up from her instruments, a mix of exhaustion and excitement on her face. "We've stabilized her condition. The baby is coming, Brian, right now." As security personnel arrived to take Rand into custody, Brian moved to Vega's side. He took her hand, marveling at the strength in her grip. "You're doing great," he said softly, his eyes never leaving hers. Vega's mandibles quivered with effort as she pushed. The room fell silent except for the beeping of medical equipment and Dr. Hicks's calm instructions. Then, piercing the quiet, came a new sound, one that neither human nor Tsenkethi ears had ever heard before. The cry of a human Tsenkethi hybrid child taking its first breath in a universe forever changed by its existence. Dr. Hicks carefully lifted the newborn, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's a girl," she announced, her voice thick with emotion. "And she's perfect." As Brian and Vega beheld their daughter for the first time, the base around them erupted in celebration. The Purity Front's attack had been repelled, and a new chapter in interspecies relations had begun. The child, her skin a soft blend of human flesh and Tsenkethi scales, opened eyes that held the depth of the cosmos. Brian and Vega exchanged a look of pure joy and trepidation, knowing that their greatest adventure was just beginning. Outside the medical facility, humans and Tsenkethi alike gathered, their differences forgotten in the wake of this miraculous event. As news of the successful birth spread, the once embattled mining outpost transformed into a symbol of hope and unity for both species. General Marcus appeared in the doorway, his usual stern expression softened by the historic moment. "Congratulations," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "You've just changed the course of history." Brian and Vega barely heard him, lost in the wonder of their newborn daughter. As they cradled her between them, they knew that the challenges ahead would be unlike anything they had faced before. But in that moment, holding the living proof of what their two species could achieve together, they felt ready to take on whatever the future might hold. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the reinforced windows of the medical wing, Brian and Vega gazed at their newborn daughter. Nova, as they had decided to name her, lay nestled between them, her tiny form a perfect blend of human and Tzenkethi features. "She's beautiful," Brian whispered, gently tracing a finger along Nova's soft scales. Vega nodded, her multifaceted eyes shimmering with emotion. "She's our future." Over the following months, the once embattled mining outpost transformed into a thriving community. The Interspecies Family Initiative, IFI, gained momentum, with more human Tzenkethi couples following in Brian and Vega's footsteps. Dr. Hicks became a constant presence in their lives, meticulously documenting Nova's growth. "Her development is remarkable," she explained during one of their regular checkups. "She's combining the best traits of both species in ways we never anticipated." Nova's accelerated growth became evident as she reached milestones far earlier than either human or Tzenkethi children typically would. At 6 months, she was already walking, her movements a graceful blend of human bipedal locomotion and Tzenkethi agility. Brian watched in amazement as Nova navigated both human and Tzenkethi play structures with ease. "She's adapting to both environments," he observed to Vega. "Yes, but it's not without its challenges," Vega replied, her mandibles clicking with concern. Indeed, their life wasn't without obstacles. They faced discrimination from some quarters, with extremist groups on both sides viewing their family as an abomination. Brian and Vega worked tirelessly to create a balanced upbringing for Nova, blending human and Tzenkethi traditions. Kraz, the Tzenkethi who had stood by them during Nova's birth, became an unexpected source of support. He took on the role of cultural liaison, helping Nova understand her Tzenkethi heritage. "Today we learn about Tzenkethi art," Kraz announced one afternoon, spreading out various tools and pigments. Nova's eyes lit up with curiosity as she watched Kraz demonstrate traditional Tzenkethi painting techniques. Brian observed the lesson, marveling at how naturally Nova absorbed both cultures. "We need to make this knowledge available to all the families," he said to Vega later that evening. Vega agreed, and together with Kraz, they established an interspecies education program. The program quickly became a model for other mixed-species colonies, with delegates from various worlds visiting to study its structure. As Nova's 5th birthday approached, the base buzzed with excitement. The upcoming celebration would symbolize not just Nova's growth, but the success of the IFI program as a whole. Delegates from Earth and the Tzenkethi homeworld will be arriving tomorrow, General Marcus informed Brian and Vega during a briefing. "This is our chance to showcase the progress we've made." The day of the celebration arrived and the base was transformed. Colorful decorations blended human and Tzenkethi aesthetics, while the air filled with the mingled aromas of cuisines from both worlds. Nova, now a precocious 5-year-old, charmed the delegates with her unique blend of human curiosity and Tzenkethi intuition. She conversed fluently in both languages, switching between them with ease. As Brian watched his daughter interact with the visiting scientists, a commotion near the base's entrance caught his attention. His military instincts, never fully dormant, kicked into high alert. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the facility. General Marcus's voice crackled over the comm system. "Security breach in sectors 3 and 4. All personnel to battle stations." Brian's eyes met Vega's across the room. Without a word, they moved into action, years of shared experiences allowing them to coordinate seamlessly. "Kraz, get Nova and the other children to the safe room," Vega ordered, her scales shifting to a defensive pattern. As Kraz ushered the frightened children away, Brian and Vega joined the security teams. They quickly identified the threat, A remnant of the Purity Front had launched a desperate attack on the base. "They're trying to reach the central plaza," a security officer reported. Brian assessed the situation rapidly. "Vega, take your team and flank them from the east. I'll lead the frontal assault." Their coordinated efforts, combining human tactical thinking with Tzenkethi battle instincts, quickly turned the tide. Brian's team engaged the attackers head-on, while Vega's group used the base's architecture to outmaneuver the enemy. In less than an hour, the threat was neutralized. As the last of the attackers were subdued, Brian and Vega rushed to check on Nova and the other children. They found Kraz standing guard outside the safe room, his powerful frame tense but unharmed. "The children are safe," he reported as Brian and Vega approached. Inside, Nova ran to her parents, her eyes wide but unafraid. "Did you stop the bad people?" she asked, her voice a mixture of human and Tzenkethi tones. Brian knelt down, embracing his daughter. "We did, sweetheart. Everything's okay now." As the base returned to normal, the incident served to highlight the ongoing need for vigilance, but it also showcased the strength that came from human Tzenkethi cooperation. In the days that followed, Brian and Vega found themselves at the center of increased attention. Their family was hailed as living proof of successful interspecies collaboration. "We need you," General Marcus said during a private meeting. "As ambassadors for the IFI program, your story could change minds across both our worlds." Brian looked at Vega, seeing his own mix of excitement and apprehension mirrored in her eyes. They both knew this decision would alter the course of their lives once again. Nova, who had been quietly playing in the corner, looked up at her parents. "Are we going on an adventure?" she asked, her voice filled with eager anticipation. Brian and Vega exchanged a smile. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as a family.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.